So welcome back to the channel and welcome to our Tuesday night live broadcast where we come to you every Tuesday night with tips, tricks, healthy recipes, announcements, all the things. And so if you are new to the channel, welcome. If you haven't joined our growing community, make sure to hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell. That way you don't miss. Listen, we never know. Inspiration is a hugely powerful tool in life. And we never know when we're going to hear the right thing that's going to spur us on to actually accomplish or achieve our goals, if you will. And so anyway, tonight we're actually going to be doing part 2. If you missed part 1, I will link it down below in the description box. But we did a part 1 where I talked about struggling with my weight. I'm a former morbidly obese woman who topped the scale at 288 pounds. I was morbidly obese and I didn't want to be. And so I struggled with my weight for a very long time, busting out of a size 22. And last week I talked about the top 5 things that I struggled with as a morbidly obese woman. And that was a really raw and completely open and honest video that we did, emotional in a couple places. But tonight, we're going to be talking about a couple different areas of overweight struggles that I never really talked about so last week, the biggest difference was my biggest struggles as being overweight. And then today, these are the biggest struggles that I kind of knew. A lot of the ones I talked about last week, I didn't necessarily know about. I didn't know I struggled with them so much until I got on the other side of them. These ones, I definitely knew that I struggled with most of them. I just didn't talk about them. So tonight we're going to talk about them because let me just say, so often weight loss can feel like a lonely place. It can feel like we have this giant struggle that nobody else understands. It can feel like we're in this by ourselves sometimes, if you will. And sometimes just hearing that other people have had the same struggle that we have, that other people have been in the same position, there's almost a freedom that can come with that. Like, wow, I'm not alone, or I don't have to struggle alone, or there's other people out there just like me that have these very same struggles. And so if you're somebody who has struggled with your weight, and I'm talking about even if you're 5 pounds overweight or 150 pounds overweight, being overweight, what I've learned is even for people that are 10 pounds overweight, it still affects you. So anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Leave us a comment, by the way. As you're watching, there's a live chat. If you're on live with us, hi, I can see you guys talking. And then also if you are watching the recording, love for you to leave us a comment. Let us know where you're watching from. And then if any of these resonate with you, let me know in the comments. So number 1, an overweight struggle I had that I never talked about was, and this was probably one of my biggest ones, is I was a legit with a capital L Spanx wearer. I wore Spanx now everywhere. And no one knew. No, I mean, everybody probably knew, but I never talked about it. There's some people that are there's the skinny people that wear Spanx, like Kim Kardashian, and they're like, oh yeah, I just wear Spanx to smooth everything out. When you're skinny and you wear Spanx, I feel like that's more, in my brain, it was more accepted. When I was wearing Spanx as a fluffy person, it wasn't, yes, partially to smooth everything out, but it was also to suck everything in. And so I can remember I actually found a brand. They weren't Spanx. They were made by Legs, like Legg''. They also make pantyhose. And in my personal opinion, they had the most power. They went from the mid calf all the way up to right underneath my boobs. And it was and I would get them a size smaller to suck everything in. And I wore these things under everything. I would wear them under yoga pants to go hiking. I would wear them under yoga pants to go bike riding. These suckers, I lived in them. I had 10 pairs of them because when you wear them every day, you have to wash them. And it was the craziest thing because I never talked about it. I was extremely secretive about it. My husband would be like, what are you wearing? And I'm like, oh, pantyhose type things. And everybody had to know. A 288-pound girl's butt is not smooth unless you have Spanx on. But I was I never talked about it. When I took them off, I would always make sure like nobody did my laundry. If anybody was folding my laundry, I would quickly get the Spanx out of there and go fold them myself. I didn't let anybody fold them. If I was hanging them up in the bathroom, I always hung something in front of them. Now, if anybody ever asked me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I wear these legs things to smooth stuff out. But I certainly was not volunteering it. It was just something I never talked about. The second thing I never talked about was my clothing size. What size clothes I wore. In fact, you would think, like, here's the thing. I knew I was overweight. Like, I knew in a size 22, 288 pounds that I was overweight. Like, I knew that. But there was also this deep level of denial that went with it. In my brain, I was the healthiest 288 pound woman. Like all the other nearly 300 pound women were way bigger than me, way unhealthier than me. I was a former athlete. So of course I have more muscle, and don't you know muscle weighs more than fat? So I would look at these other fluffy people and I would totally not put myself in the same boat as them. Like I had a multi-million-dollar business. I was very productive. I still got dressed up in heels and nice clothing. I still looked in the mirror and looked and said, you look good, girlfriend. Like you look good. So there was still times. So I say all that to say, like I was never real with myself. And even when I would see photos of myself, like I knew I was fluffy, but I did not know to the extent my eyeballs had, you know how you can put on like rose colored glasses and it tints what you're seeing, like it can distort what you're seeing. And so often our vision can be distorted. Like we can have some people, you've seen people before that lose too much weight and they still think they look fat because they have a distorted vision of how they look. This can also be the case when we gain weight, right? When we gain weight, so sometimes we can still hold on to the way we used to look and we don't have a clear vision of also how we look. I see this so often with clients that I work with. And so, like I would cut the tags out of all my clothes. Like, and when I think about it, like I know a size 22 woman is not a small girl. Like that's a big, that's a large size pair of pants. I still have some of them sitting over here in my office, but it just never really, I never talked about my clothing size. My husband didn't know what I wore. People didn't buy me clothes. They didn't buy me items. Like I just was totally closed off about my size. And, you know, part of the thing that sucks about this is we're never going to get to where we want to go unless we fully come to terms with where we're at. We can't hide from where we're at and somehow expect to get over it or expect to get past it. You can't fight an invisible battle. You can't fight something that you don't know what you're fighting against. And so, gosh, I was so secretive about my clothes tags, so much so that I cut them out. And then when people would ask me, this doesn't have a tag, I would say silliest, stupidest things like, oh, the tags bother me. Tags don't bother me. But I think honestly, I had convinced myself that the tags bothered me because now though, that I don't care about the size of my clothing. I haven't cut a tag out in years. It doesn't even matter. So, all right. Number 3, shopping. An overweight struggle that I had that I did not talk about was shopping. I definitely clung on to the fact that I didn't like shopping. I didn't want to go shopping. I didn't enjoy shopping. But the thing I really think, and I'm not a huge shopper, but I think the thing that I didn't enjoy the most was I didn't enjoy the way shopping made me feel. I didn't enjoy going into a store and having to try on several things that didn't fit. I didn't enjoy going into a store and going to put something on and it wouldn't fit my chest, or it wouldn't fit my waist, or it wouldn't fit, it just wouldn't fit, or I didn't like the way it fit. I would see these other girls or, you know, whatever, wearing something and it looked so cute, something that was on trend. And then I would go to wear it and I would like, this is not at all what I thought it would look like. And so I never talked about shopping. If you listen to last week's video, I talked about how I went wedding dress shopping by myself. You know, your wedding dress shopping when you're supposed to go with your family and friends to wedding dress shop. I made 3 appointments at 3 different wedding dress stores, and I didn't even want the girls' help. Like I just started pulling stuff off the racks myself and tried it on. and I found 3 dresses that I liked. I took my friends and family back. They saw the 3 dresses and we made a decision. But even then, I can remember them measuring me for my wedding dress, and they had to order, even though my pant size was a size 22, the wedding dress had to either be a 24 or 26 because I had larger chest, and they had to, but I can remember being so embarrassed that my wedding dress, I can't remember, I think it was a 24. My wedding dress had to be a size 24. And I can remember even after the wedding, them saying, Carmen, you know, because I was selling my wedding dress. I didn't want it. I didn't want to keep it. I had it cleaned and it went on Craigslist, because back then that's how you sold things. They didn't have the marketplace. And I remember my husband being like, don't you want to keep this for our daughters? And I was like, no, like, I don't want my daughter to be a size 24 when she gets married, because I knew all the struggles I had with my weight. And so I sold that puppy. Bye. And so shopping was a huge struggle that I never talked about. Never talked about it. Never went shopping with my mom. Didn't like going shopping, because I can remember in high school when I started having a weight issue. And I can remember going prom dress shopping, and we would go to all the little stores like JCPenney's and Macy's, and we had a very hard time finding a dress that fit. And it was like this really long process, and I would leave that experience feeling so defeated, so crappy, so like I didn't fit in. And so unfortunately, when we go through these experiences that hurt us, we then avoid them to keep ourselves from being hurt. And so I just created this wall when it came to shopping that, no, don't like it, don't want to do it, and I just never did it. The number 4, and this is kind of a threefer. This is like a 3-in-1 things, overweight struggles that I never talked about. All the things eating. Secret eating, binge eating, emotional eating, those 3 things. Eating. So first let's talk about secret eating. This is where you eat things in secret and nobody knows about them. This is where you grab one of the Snickers candy bars from off the table in the office and you put it in your pocket, and then you don't eat it. You go in your office and you eat it in private, and then you shove the wrapper to the bottom. This is where you go through the drive-thru on the way home and you get food, and then you go home and still eat a full meal. This is when you go to pick up pizza for the family for dinner, and right next to the pizza is a Taco Bell, and you run through and grab 2 chalupas and you eat the chalupas on the way home, and then you go home and eat pizza with the rest of the family. This is where you are making frosting and you take a bite of the frosting and someone walks in the room and you stop chewing so they don't know that you just took a bite of the frosting. This is where we eat. I can remember being on vacation in Nicaragua. I was pregnant with our second child. We had our first child already. And I brought like this king size Hershey's candy bar with almonds, and I had it in my suitcase. And when I packed it in there, I didn't think at the time, I'm going to stand in the closet and eat this. But what happened was I unpacked it, and I would open up the candy bar and I would break off a piece, stick it back in my suitcase, and then I'd stay in the closet and I would eat it. I didn't want anybody to see me eating it. And then I would leave it in the closet, and like nobody knew it was there. And then when I finished the candy bar, I would wad it up real small, wrap it in some toilet paper, and then throw it in the garbage so that nobody would see. And like, who was looking? Like, who was going through the garbage to actually look for a Hershey's candy bar wrapper? Like, legitimately, Carmen. I'm a grown woman wrapping a wrapper in toilet paper so nobody sees it. Like, and back then it seemed so normal. It seemed so normal. It seemed like there was nothing wrong with it. But now when I say it out loud, it's like the lengths I went to keep this secret eating addiction. It's crazy to actually verbalize, but it was such a regular part of my life. There was binge eating, getting a whole bunch of food and eating it all at one time, like sitting down, eating till I was full, and then falling asleep and then waking up and eating more. Like there would be Sundays, my husband would go to his favorite cigar shop and I would just plan the whole day around eating and napping and eating and napping and eating and napping. And that would be how I would choose to spend that day. It was my day off. But Or I would not eat anything in the morning. Like I would not eat it all in the morning, and then I would eat all my food for lunch and dinner. Or sometimes I'd go all the way till dinner. I'd be busy working and I would just get busy and not eat anything. And then I would eat all my 2,000 to 3,000 calories after 8 o'clock at night. I would just eat it all and then go to sleep. And so eating large quantities of food in short amounts of time was definitely something I did. Then there was emotional eating. And emotional eating, I had lots of people eat for different emotional reasons. Like some people eat when they're happy. Some people eat when they're sad. Some people want to eat when they celebrate. I wanted to eat during all of them. When I'm mad, I'm going to eat and I'm going to clean. When I'm sad, I'm going to eat and I'm going to clean. When I'm happy, I'm just going to eat. And back then I definitely would have drank. And so but eating was definitely a part of every emotion that I could think of. And this of course started from when I was small, as it has for many of you. But the most crazy part about all this is I just told you guys these 3 areas that I really struggled with eating. But the funny part is I had convinced myself, and I actually had this come out of my mouth, that I eat pretty healthy. I eat pretty good. Like I actually had the thought one time that the reason I'm overweight is because I don't eat enough food. This actually came out of my mouth legitimately. And it wasn't until I was watching the show Survivor, and I was watching these people hunt and forage for their food and build shelters and do really rugged, hard things. And they're eating sometimes not for days, and they're eating these tiny amounts. And it's like, okay, Carmen, it was looking at the kids from Ethiopia who didn't have food. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. These people that don't have food, they're not fluffy. And it was all of a sudden I had this realization that no, you're fluffy because you're eating too much. You don't get fluffy by not eating enough. That's not a thing. But in my brain, and what I've come to realize is in a lot of people's brains that come from fluffy land like I did, we've told ourselves things like that, right? And so I had all these food issues that I didn't talk about, nobody knew about. And now I'll talk about them with my husband and he'll be like, oh my gosh, Carmen, he's like, why didn't you tell me these things? And it's always like, babe, how do you go to somebody and be like, hey, yeah, I'm secret eating. I'm standing in a closet eating a candy bar. How do you do that? How, I guess you just do it. But when you're overweight, you convince yourself that you can't tell anybody, but you're never going to get help on something, or you're never going to get past something that you pretend doesn't exist. Or as long as I thought I ate healthy, I was never going to change it. And it was finally getting to the point of, Carmen, you're morbidly obese because you eat like a morbidly obese woman. If you ate like a skinny person, you'd be skinny. If you ate like a fit person, you'd be fit. You are morbidly obese because you eat like a morbidly obese woman. And if you want to not be morbidly obese, you have to stop eating like a morbidly obese woman. And until I got really real with myself, nothing changed. The 5th one is overweight struggle that I never talked about, was that being overweight actually bothered me. If you would have talked to any of my friends, any of my family, most of them just thought I had no problem with my weight. They thought that I had no problem with my size. I was completely confident. I was a woman on a mission. I knew where I was going in life. I had a lot of different accomplishments under my belt in the business world. I put on a front, and I was a very good actress. I was very good at pretending that I had it all together. I was very good at pretending that my weight didn't bother me, that I wasn't self-conscious. But the truth was, it bothered me immensely. It bothered me so much that I wore Spanx under everything, just like I told you guys on the first thing. If my weight didn't bother me, I wouldn't have been putting the Spanx on. If my weight didn't bother me, I wouldn't have been cutting the tags out of my clothes. If my weight didn't bother me, I wouldn't have cared about taking people shopping with me. If my weight didn't bother me, I wouldn't have been secret eating, binge eating, and I wouldn't have been doing that. So I put on this front like I had it all together and my weight never bothered me. But deep down, oh, did it bother me? It bothered me a ton. And I just never talked about it. Until I started losing the weight, my husband and I never talked about my weight. We never talked about it bothering me. We never talked about, I can remember we'd be on a cruise and he'd be like, hey, why don't we do this horseback riding thing? And I, of course, he didn't know to look for a weight limit. He didn't even know what I weighed. He didn't even know that was a thing. I would look in the book, I'd go find the weight limit, and I'd be like, no, I don't want to do that. I wouldn't tell him why. He'd be like, hey, why don't we do this clear bottom kayaking? Again, go to the weight. Boat limit, 400 pounds. I weighed 288. You don't weigh 122, honey. So, no, I don't want to do that. And I would just like create this wedge between us. And I talked about that last week in part one of this, where I pretended like it didn't bother me. I just put up a front, and it really led me to living this limited life. It certainly didn't lead me to a place where I was living in freedom, or I was living my best life. And then the last and final struggle that I have down here, of course, there's a ton I could talk about, but this was one. These are ones that I did fairly often, a lot, weekly actually, is I didn't eat in front of people. I did eat in front of people, but I was, again, acting when I ate in front of people. I can remember, like, I would always be super self-conscious about eating in front of people as like an overweight person. When we would go out to dinner, so often I would never finish my plate. We'd go to like the Cheesecake Factory, and I'd be looking around, looking at what to order. And of course, I'm trying to see what's going to give me the most amount of food. What's going to give me a decent amount of food, right? Because I didn't want to order those tiny, small plate. I wanted to have enough food. I would eat half of my food, and I'd be like, oh, I'm so full. And then I would get a box to go. I would go home. As soon as nobody was around, I would eat the rest of my leftovers. I would eat them. If one of my friends said to me, hey, you want to split something? Even if I didn't want to split something, I would have been like, yeah, okay, sure. I'd love to. Thanks so much for asking. Inside, I'm like, no, I don't want to split something. I want to eat it all. So, or I would be super conscious about snacking, even on an apple in front of people. I did most of my eating in private versus in public. And when I did eat in public, I ate healthy. Like at a restaurant, I'd order things like a salad. It's the wildest thing when I think back. Like I was fully fueling this fake fantasy denial world versus being real and raw with myself and saying, no, Carmen, like looking at the numbers, like now I can look back and be like, man, I was morbidly obese in the moment. You would have not caught me dead saying I was morbidly obese back then. Never. I just didn't talk about these things. But here's what I can tell you. Being in denial and not talking about these struggles did not make my life better. Pretending that I wasn't struggling didn't make it better. It didn't make it go away. It just sent me deeper into this spiral. It just made me more isolated. It just made me dig into these bad habits even more. It wasn't until I started coming to terms, into grips with these things, that I could actually do something about them. And so the whole reason why I'm sharing these in these past 2 weeks is because I know I'm not the only one who's struggled like this. I know I'm not the only one who's had these problems. I know I'm not the only one who's cut the tags out. I know I'm not the only one who's secret eating. I know I'm not the only one who does emotional eating, binge eating. I know I'm not the only one who pretends like they have it all together and that their weight doesn't bother them. I know I'm not the only one who's been secretive about their Spanx, and I know that. And sometimes there's a freedom in knowing that you're not on this island by yourself and that there's other people like you that have struggled. But that there's also hope in the fact that you don't have to stay there and you don't have to keep struggling, and there is a way out. And if you have this desire and this goal inside of you to be healthy, well, gosh darn it, what are you waiting for? And that doesn't come from a place of judgment. It comes from me being exactly where you're at and waiting for the right time and the right person and the right diet and the right whatever to appear. The only thing that matters is you are hearing this message because you are the right person, and this is the time. This is the time for you to take control. That desire inside of you to be healthy isn't going away. Have you figured that out yet? No matter how many times you failed to get healthy, that nagging feeling inside of you is still there. And we literally sacrifice this deep desire inside of us to be healthy for food for future poop, future shit, future caca. We eat it and we crap it out the next day. I probably told myself that several times a day for the first several months. Carmen, this is future poop. Carmen, this is future poop. But sometimes in the moment that future poop, oh, it sounds so good, doesn't it? But I wanted to really share these last 2 weeks because so often when I get clients started on these weight loss journeys and we start going through some of these things, they're so surprised that somebody else had these thoughts, somebody else had these behaviors, somebody else did these exact same things. So I want you to know, if that's you, you're not alone. And if that is you, if you've had these same struggles, there's hope. And you don't have to stay stuck. Being overweight is not your lot in life. At any moment in time, you can turn the ship around and start creating a new future. And so anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. If you want to weigh in the comments, let me know if you've done any of these before, or maybe you have some things that you struggled with being overweight that you've never talked about. I would love to hear about it in the comments. This is a safe place. You're not alone. I promise you, if you type them, I've probably done them as well. They just didn't make the list for me to talk about tonight. And so we'll be back live next Tuesday, same time, same place. Have an amazing week on purpose, and I'll see you back next week.